Thank you very much for coming. We are in for a treat tonight. Gordon Orians, who has been a resident of Horizon House for a number of years now, is somebody who has taken us on bird walks and has talked to us about a variety of things. So Gordon is somebody who needs no introduction, which usually is the lead-in for a long paragraph, but Gordon doesn't get it tonight. Welcome, Gordon, about the fantastic information that has been developed about the Northern Great Plains ecoregion. Gordon.
I'm amazed people clap first. I don't know if this is in anticipation or what, but anyway. I'm delighted to talk to you about the Northern Great Plains ecoregion, which you see here. However, if you walk from Bozeman to that line, you won't see anything. Nothing saying, welcome to the Northern Great Plains ecoregion. And 99% of the people who live there have no idea that they're living in the North Great Plains ecoregion. And for that matter, what is an ecoregion? Who made this map and why? What purpose is it intended to serve? Because we're drawing lines on the environment that don't really exist there. A little louder? Okay, thank you. So I will try to explain what happens to create this. And it's a creation of the World Wildlife Fund. And at the time that this was developed, I was a board member of World Wildlife Fund. I'm now an emeritus board member of World Wildlife Fund. I'm also emeritus at the University of Washington. That's something that you get for continuing to survive. And the only way you get rid of it is to die, and I'm declining to do that for a while anyway. So I want to explain why we got this map and what was it intended to do and how it affects the thinking that this map represents. What did it try to do about how we do conservation and do it differently? And then I will come back and look at what we're actually doing on the Northern Great Plains and how thinking about it this way has affected how we do conservation. So, backtracking a bit, World Wildlife Fund, which has world headquarters in Glan, Switzerland, and U.S. headquarters in Washington, D.C., and it works in more than 80 countries around the world. And there was this growing apprehension that we were making progress on doing this and that, but things keep getting worse. Is there some way we could think differently about how you do conservation that might help? So we had workshops. We invited people, and I was on the board at that time, and we brought people in from various places around the world and had workshops in Washington, D.C. Is there some new way we could think about that might give us better traction? And what came up was the concept of an ecoregion. So what is an ecoregion? The idea is to develop and think about conservation on a scale that matches somewhat how ecological processes work and how evolutionary processes work, and to see if we could capture that by thinking about conservation on a bigger scale. So we divided the world up into 200 and some ecoregions, and each one was big enough that you could see ecological and evolutionary processes unfolding, you could think about them, but also there was a region that had some sort of internal coherence that makes sense to think about it as a unit and to plan according to it. So the idea of the Northern Great Plains, it's a short grass prairie, close to the mountains, and as you go further east, it gets wetter and wetter, and you notice way off in the corner that it says tall grass prairie. As you get into the Midwest, the grass gets taller, and more rain falls and the grass gets taller, because the summer rains are fed by the Gulf of Mexico air coming up from the north. And a lot of the further east you get, the more the Gulf of Mexico storms dump on you, so it gets wetter. And where I grew up in southern Wisconsin, the tall grass prairie, the grasses get up to 8, 10 feet high. You can lose the cows in them, and but out here in the northern Great Plains, this is arid. It's very dry. It's short grass prairie, and it is dominated by a number of grasses, and it has a certain number of wildlife species that's sort of characteristic of the region that seem to make sense. This is a unit to think about in doing conservation. So the idea of creating ecoregions was to say, let's think about nature and try to do conservation on a different scale. And wherever we're doing something locally on any one of these spots, think about it, how is this affecting what we're going to achieve in the conservation in the total region? So you try to see what each different thing means and try to develop, and I will end up with what is my vision of what conservation success would look like in the northern Great Plains ecoregion. So that's why this map was created and what it was intended to do. And let me just stop a minute. Is the idea of an ecoregion, have I explained it well enough that we can go on, or should we stop for a little Q&A? Go on. Okay. So I say this is the result of a lot of workshops, and the World Wildlife Fund bought into this as a way to try to do conservation. And so what gives this some sort of internal unity? The northern part you can see there is how far down the glaciers came. And the glaciers came down to right now where the Missouri River flows, that beautiful canyon through which the Missouri River flows. That's the limit of glaciation. And further north, if you've been across Montana on Highway 2, there's the big Milk River Valley. There's the big broad valley, and a tiny little stream is flowing through it. And you know, wait a minute, that stream didn't make that valley. That's where the Missouri River used to flow. And it got pushed down by the glaciers and has formed this new one, which is why it's new and very, very exciting. There's this, it's short grass, and it's high summer precipitation. It's low, it's very dry, but the precipitation peak comes in the summer. The wettest month of the year there in Bozeman and over here is June. Where I grew up in southern Wisconsin, what's the wettest month of the year? June. Those of us that live on the Pacific coast have a very blinkered idea about world climates, that are supposed to be wet in the winter and dry in the summer. Wrong. There are 5 places on Earth where that occurs. One, of course, is the Mediterranean, after which it's named. But lower mid-latitudes on the west side of continents where cold waters are flowing toward the equator. That's where it occurs, nowhere else. So abuse yourself of the fact that it's supposed to be wet in the winter and dry in the summer, that's typical. That's a very unusual climate, and it's not characteristic of this area. So it makes sense that the greatest precipitation comes in June, because that's when the heating by the sun is the greatest. And what causes all of things to happen is the sun warms the air, it gives you turbulence, and that's what generates a lot of the precipitation. So right around the world, there is most of the places where there are striking rainy seasons and dry seasons. It is when the peak of the sun is the highest and the days are the longest that the heaviest precipitation occurs. So that's true here. It's true over quite a bit of the country and quite a bit of the temperate zones of the world. So this is then, it's not, a grassland. So this is the plains, and it's a grassland. And so it's dominated by grasses. And this ecoregion, which has this high summer precipitation, it's pretty dry, but the rain comes at the right time, is dominated by grasses that, when they develop photosynthesis, and the first compound that you put together after CO2 has got 4 carbon atoms rather than 3. So the grasses are developed into C3 or C4 organisms, and corn is C4, wheat is C3. So this is dominated by C4 grasses, which do very well in dry and heat, and that's what's dominating here. So it's a set of grasses which characterize this region. The reason, why do we call it a region? Why should this be a useful way to think about conservation? Well, there's a certain number of things like the grasses. It's also characterized by a certain number of species of mammals and birds that find the center of their breeding range here, that are adapted to the wet summers and the precipitation that occurs there, but the dry winters and fairly arid. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get down to really doing conservation in the Great Plains. So this area, is there something magical about the boundaries? No. Might we have drawn them slightly differently? Yes. Would they have been equally useful or not useful for them drawn that way? Yes. The detail's not in these boundaries, it's in the idea that you have a scale like this. This is a big enough area that when we can talk about conservation in any one place, we can ask, how is this contributing to what we want to accomplish in the total area in conservation? And can we get a picture of what success would look like at the end of all of this? And I'll offer for you my vision of what success might be. So this is a thinking tool. And the evidence that it's going to be a useful thinking tool is something that determined empirically. Does it work? Has it helped us to think differently about conservation? Has it given us new insights and new success? I will try to show you that it has. But before I go into the details of that, we need to take a slight detour about grasses. These prairies are dominated by grasses, but human beings and mammals have a very interesting history with grasses, and it's worth recounting this a little bit as we come to this. And we begin the history 66 million years ago. What happened 66 million years ago? A meteorite came slamming into the earth and created a nuclear winter and fires and did an awful lot of damage. Among the things it did is it wiped out all the dinosaurs. And if it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be talking to you. That may or not be a good reason for it, but anyway, that's what it would be. So who survived that? Well, the birds that survived it, it was a nuclear winter, the trees died, everything, it was awful. And there's a little black iridium layer all around the world dated to that time that indicated something big had happened. People couldn't find the crater. Where was it? Something big had happened. Where was the crater? Well, since it's been found, it's just off the north coast of Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And you can see it's all underwater, but it caused something really tremendous. So who survived that? Well, the dinosaurs didn't, as we know. But some birds, there were a lot of birds around before that. Some of them made it. And it's the ones that really, either you fed in the ocean, which was not the same way affected by this, or you fed on seeds, because there's a seed bank, and the seeds are still there. As we know, plants in the desert, they can have the seed bank, and it doesn't rain for 8 years, and it rains, and all of a sudden, everything's coming up. There's a seed bank there. So the things that fed on the seeds the ones that survived. And the same is probably true of mammals that made it through. There were mammals going for a long time, reptile-like mammals that gave rise to a totally different radiation, but not from the dinosaurs. And then there were a lot of mammals around, small in the understory, other stuff. But the mammals that made it through are probably also those that were just dependent upon seeds and that could survive, and you could get over the nuclear winter. And then, so this really reset the whole thing. And what happened then is grasses assumed an incredibly important part of this, because grasses had not been a big part of what happened before, but dinosaurs are these great big things. They're eating horsetails that were 50 meters tall and all of that sort of stuff. But what this big explosion did is opened up things for grasses. And grasses are really very unusual. And if we have to think about grasses, which we don't like to do because we're all told the wonderful forest, we've got to save the forests. And in fact, as some of us decided we wanted to do this, there's a lot of resistance on board members. Why do we want to pour money into impoverished grasslands when we could save tropical rainforest? Good question. There's a lot of reasons for this, but humanity today, over half of the calories consumed worldwide every day come from the seeds of 3 annual grasses: wheat, corn, and rice, none of which can be used without being cooked. And so one of the things that really moved this along, as I mentioned in the previous talk, our ancestors invented cooking and gave us a new set of stuff we could eat and a whole bunch of stuff that was pre-digesting and getting it good. So grasses are really important, and grasses are funny. Plants are defended in all sorts of ways by nasty chemicals that poison herbivores or knock up the proteins. And grasses don't have any of that. Grasses do not have strong chemical defenses. Grasses they're tough, silica. And so you grind your teeth down trying to eat grass. And, well, when we make salads, we don't make grass salads. Don't try it, don't try it. We talk the little broadleaf plants, you get rid of the chemicals and they're nice and soft. But grasses are defended physically. So you grind your teeth down, which is why the saying goes, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Because if you're going to buy a horse, that's the first place you want to look, because the teeth get worn down and you can tell whether you got an old nag or another. That's the best place to tell. So this involved changing the tooth structure, continuously growing molars of the rodents and big mammals that changed the ability to handle this stuff. Another interesting thing about grass is that the growing tip is not at the top, it's at the bottom. Grass grows up from the bottom. So when you mow your lawn, you don't kill the grass. It grows faster. So this is perfect. Grasses are then perfectly adapted to arid climates when fires and stuff rage through, because it stores everything underground. When the grass has a little extra energy to store, it puts it underground. And when the fire goes through and the growing tip is down there, the fire goes through, boom, it opens up and starts growing again. And so grass, it's very unusual to have this come from the bottom, which then makes grasses superbly adapted to climates where you get a lot of disturbance. And in grasslands, in fact, occur around, there's no such thing as a grassland climate. Grasslands occur in all sorts of climates around the world, but they're generally fairly arid, and they're dry enough that some combination of fire and disturbance like by large mammals can keep grasses from, woody plants from invading and taking over. And that's what happens when grasslands are not burned or heavily grazed. Woody plants tend to take over and they will eventually depress the grasses, because all you have to do is shade the bottom. The growing tip is down at the bottom there, and it doesn't take too much to cover that up and stop it. So amazingly, grasslands are stimulated and become much more productive if they're grazed heavily. It's like grasses, to speak the way I shouldn't speak, want to be grazed, because what you're doing is opening it up, and the mammals pee and poop and fertilizing, and you're recycling it really, really fast. And so if you graze grassland, you increase productivity. And so the incredible productivity on the Serengeti, if you've ever been there, that depends upon the fact that these millions of big mammals are crunching and disturbing everything and moving around and creating this recycling of rapid stuff. So grasslands are for rapid recycling of things, and they depend upon this disturbance, either from fire or large mammals or both, to keep things from being invaded by woody plants that tend to take over. So grasslands are disturbance environments. They thrive on disturbance, and if you try to stop the disturbance, you kill the grassland, because the woody plants will very, very quickly take over. So all around the world, grasslands are dependent upon some combination of fire and big mammals to keep things going, and that's true here in the northern Great Plains, where it's very driest on the west, and you can see off in the corner this tall grass prairie where it's getting wetter as you're going east. Where I grew up in Wisconsin was tall grass, and so as you're going east, it's getting wetter and wetter and wetter, and finally it gets too wet, and the disturbance isn't enough to keep the woody plants out. So the grasses are very unusual. And it's hard to remember, that the growing point is at the bottom. And that's different than it was with most plants. And why shading the bottom cuts everything down. And if you just let the grass go a little bit and it shades the bottom, and it stops. You dramatically increase the productivity of grass. And that's something that is not well understood, because you see this business, got to get rid of the cows. Well, we're trying to restore bison over all of this. And bison produce methane, don't they? Just like cows do. So, but we're talking about the fact that big mammals are an important part of this, and they're an important part of the whole evolution of grasslands in the last 60 million years, and this disturbance. And we're in the middle of it. And human beings, our whole culture and evolution is so much tied up with grasslands. Now, what's saved the grasslands by putting everything down underneath also means that these black prairie soils, grasslands make it. They don't inherit it, they make it. I grew up in southern Wisconsin, where it was a mosaic of oak, woodland, and prairie. And it's all gone now, and it's all farm. But I could drive around in a car, and I could tell where the prairie was and where the oak woodland was. Where the oakland wood, the soil is brown. Where the prairie was, the soil is black. So grassland makes the black soil. It doesn't inherit it, it makes it. And that's because it puts everything underground, if you got everything to store. And when the fire goes through, it doesn't destroy the stuff that it saved. So that means that grassland, the black prairie soils, the best soils in the world for agriculture, are created by grass. Here's the problem. For a long time, the grasslands were spared because you got that thick sod, and we didn't have anything to break it. So early human agriculture was on river deltas where the floods came through and opened it up, and you didn't have the prairie sod you had to get through. And so the grasslands were spared for a long time until we finally got a plow that could cut the grassland soil. And the Department of Agriculture put out a wonderful film that I saw a number of years ago, The Plow That Broke the Plains. And it was a marvelous thing how wonderful it is. And that's of course what it did. But grasslands were saved until fairly recently because we didn't have a plow that could break the plains. But once we got it, what are the best agricultural soils in the world? Where the grasses made it black. So immediately we've gone and done away with most of it. And so grasslands are the most endangered ecosystem type in the world, much more endangered than tropical forests. There's almost none of it left. And one of the reasons we decided to do this one in the United States is that in the Missouri Plateau and through most of that area, there was still intact prairie. It hadn't been plowed yet. It was too dry for agriculture, so it was still in grass. And if you want to restore grass that's been destroyed, the best way is to not destroy it in the first place, and to keep it there. But we found that as we talked about what are we going to, how are we going to do something in the United States, and we got this idea of an ecoregion, and many of us felt that we better. WWF works in about 80 countries around the world, but we'd better have a big project in the United States. Otherwise, you say, you don't have any credibility. If this is such a great idea, why aren't you doing it? Where's your buffalo, white man, you know? So we realized that we really needed to have a big program in the United States. We saw that there was a real opportunity here because there still was in this Missouri Plateau and up and through there, and the glaciated plains, there was a lot of grassland that had never been plowed. And there's a chance then that we can build on something that's still there. It's not totally destroyed. So that led to deciding that the Northern Great Plains was a place where we could try to work out this whole business, where we had some stuff to work with. There was a lot of grassland left. There was other stuff happening, and we could build on this whole program to give us a big thing. So that's the background, that how we came up with this idea of an ecoregion, what this ecoregion basically looks like, and how does this influence what kind of conservation do we try to do. So we try to look at each individual project that comes across this and ask what's it contributing, how does it help contribute to a total picture of doing conservation in this area. And the first thing we came to know is that when Lewis and Clark went through, and they went through this area right through here, and right there's the river, the Missouri River, and that's where they saw the largest number of big wild mammals. That's right where Clark got chased into the Missouri River by a grizzly bear, and you can see their note. They took great notes about stuff, and right where we were started to work there is where, on their entire trip out to the coast, they saw more bigger herds of wild mammals, particularly bison and elk and pronghorn, than they saw anywhere else. So we started working in an area where we knew that it had been great and where there was a lot of intact prairie still left. So we decided, so we started bringing people out to the prairie. This is not something you can have an art show in somebody's house or show pictures. It's very, very different. Have people walk up to a bison herd, and there's an emotional change, and out come the wallets. It's really true. You can't do this any other way. So the experience of being out there and being is so wonderful. So decided, we had a lot of safaris, brought people out and introduced them to the prairie, and what a wonderful place it was. But it became obvious that if you really wanted to try to recreate what Lewis and Clark saw, recreate what is sometimes called the American Serengeti, this involved buying a lot of land, because you got to. And World Wildlife Fund did not want to become a big landowner, so we decided, okay, we will spawn the American Prairie, which an independent entity. It's got its own board. and it negotiates for and buys land. And so it buys land from willing sellers. At the time this started, there were willing sellers because none of the ranchers had any Social Security or anything like that. What they had, the value was their ranch, and what they could retire on is what they could sell the ranch for. So you had willing sellers, you paid market prices, and you could let them stay on the land longer if they wanted to. But eventually, this meant that it got turned over and became a part of an expanding prairie. And that's still going on. And the American Prairie is buying more land as we talk, both on the north and south sides of the Missouri River. It now has a visitor center where you can come from May to September. You can come and get tours around there and see everything. It's got a research station, and it's developing a wonderful program of introducing people to the prairie. Come on out and experience this. This is such a big part of the American experience. And the Fish and Wildlife Service on its emblem, what does it have there? A bison, not something else, a bison. So that this is Americana, and this is a part of what is being done now to show people that this is a part of our heritage and it's really important. So that's one thing that's going on, and you can have a wonderful time booking in there and getting a tour from May to September, and it's a wonderful experience. And American Prairie also has a center in Lewistown, or in the center of Montana, where they have displays and a visitor center where people can come and see. So that's one aspect of, okay, here's a chance to recreate what Lewis and Clark saw. Because all the animals, all the species they saw are still there except one. We've lost only one species. And it's an insect. It's the locust, the swarming locust, which was there and hasn't been seen for a long time, and we're not really certain what happened, but I don't think most people are really missing the locusts too badly. So everything else that Lewis and Clark saw is still there. So we're going to try to recreate this, and this is something where it's going to be big enough. There are no wolves there now because they come through it and they get shot. And grizzly bears come dispersing out of the Rocky Mountains, coming forward. They're slow, and they'll make it someday. But they have the bad habit of having lamb chops on the way, and so they have to get removed and taken back to the Rockies. So, but they will make it, and again, this will be big enough to have the predator-prey system, the ecosystem with bison going around and bashing up and doing all sorts of stuff, and prairie dogs, which are big ground squirrels, that also modify the vegetation in big ways. They change it, and they change it from a grass-dominated to a non-grass-dominated little system of small, we call the non-grasses in the prairie forbs, F-O-R-B, and so that could everything else. And what the prairie dogs do, change it from a grassland system to a forb system. It looks pretty barren in these prairie dog towns, but these are fast-growing little things, and that's what prairie dogs don't like, that tall grass. They don't have the machinery to eat through all that silica. So they've changed. So you have bison changing the system a lot, and prairie dog, and these are two what we call ecosystem engineers. These are animals that change a lot about how things work, and they affect dramatically. And what we're hoping in this area, as we'll see, the ranchers love the land and they haven't bashed it, but everything is almost uniformly grazed now. And there's a certain kind of birds and mammals that like it moderately heavily grazed. But when the bison were around, there were places they missed, they didn't get around, grew tall. There were places they really bashed and chewed up. And so you got a mosaic. And we've learned that a lot of the birds and mammals that live in that grassland do much better, have different requirements, and moderately heavily grazed, but still okay, the same everywhere. There's certainly a lot of species that just don't make it there. So we're hoping the mosaic with the bison moving on and all of this will change it, and we'll see what the prairie was like when the mammals were in charge of it. And we hope that it's happening. They're getting more and more land, and it's a very exciting development. But that's only going to be a small portion. That's going to be just something right along in here. That's going to be a tiny fraction of the northern Great Plains. And important, we want it, but what about all the rest? What does a vision for this look like with all the rest? Well, one thing is that important we've discovered, there were people that lived here, and they were all bison people. Their whole culture was around bison, and they wanted to, and they all lost their bison, but they want bison back. And so we've been working with a number of the Indian tribes, helping them restore bison and bring bison back to their lands. And this is wonderful to see them getting the bison. And one of the tribes we've been working with, within 3 years from their start, they had a herd over 1,000 bison. And it's going to be one, and this is, the bison, of course, is going to be a cash cow. There aren't going to be wolves and bears on that land. The human beings are going to be the predator on the bison, but it's going to be something that they can then grow, sell the meat, help starvation, which is a problem in the tribes that are very poor. The bison can be a cash cow and really help a lot. So we're working with the Indian tribes, but it's not that simple, because they were all bison people, and they never had agriculture in this area. They were hunters and gatherers, and mostly hunters. And the bison gave them everything, the skins, everything, the whole thing. Well, they can't go back to that. They could get a lot of bison, but they can't go back to that. So we're helping them, and it's wonderful to see them. They're developing corporations, and they're building houses, and we're helping teach them how to farm. They never had any farming. They don't know what it's like. So they now go to the grocery store and buy junk food, and they have real nutritional problems. So we're having to work with them to teach them how to farm, because they didn't have any agricultural experience. And some of the tribes that are working on this, it's really wonderful. They're becoming entrepreneurial and considering how we treated these people over the centuries, giving them, stealing their land, poisoning them, and everything. It's wonderful. I mean, I just find it very inspirational to see these people coming back, declaring their identity, building their culture back, and in which bison are playing this wonderful part. So that's a big thing that we're doing. But again, that's going to be a moderately small fraction of the total land. The rest of it is going to be in ranches. And the question is it going to be profitable to ranch this country? Can you keep them there? And so we're working a lot with ranchers. And at first they thought, of course, that we were out to put them out of business, because the conservation movement and particularly the WWF International in Europe is against cows. Well, if we're going to do the conservation in this, we can't be against cows. But Martha Kaufman, who runs the program there now, has just done a wonderful job of it, faces this problem, you present your foot, but you're really secretly trying to put us out of business, aren't you? You're against cows. You're a Trojan horse, aren't you, to sneaking in and pretending to be something, but you really want to put us out of business. And the point, we don't. We know that unless the ranchers can make a living out there with cows, what's the alternative? It's going to be a factory's going to come in to produce ethanol, and we're going to raise corn and soybeans, and it's going to go to make ethanol to feed cars. That's the realistic alternative out there. It's not some nice organic farming, because most of that isn't any good there. So it's going to be the alternative. That's the alternative we have to fight against. Is an ethanol factory that's going to feed cars. We're going to use the wonderful productivity of the soils to feed cars. And most of us think that's a horrible sort of option. And so how can we help keep ranchers on the land? So the other big part of our program is working with the ranchers. How can we help them stay on the land? And we're doing a number of different things. We're helping them with regeneration. I was just on the prairie a couple of weeks ago, and we were with ranchers that are trying new methods to move cows around without using fences, by training them on a tower, and it's not working too well yet, because they're falling off. But this is going to be really important, because one of the things to make cows manage the prairie, much like the way bison did, they got to keep moving. You got to move them around, and it's too expensive to put up fences, and they're just not in that country. There's not going to do it fences. So you have to be able to move the cows around without fences. I think it's going to be possible, but there's a lot of work yet. We're also working on a sustainable beef initiative. We're trying to get, and we got a lot of ranchers that are engaged in this, to try to get premium price if you can be certified that you are a sustainable, ecologically sensitive rancher, and that you're raising, using your land and raising your cows in ways that support biodiversity. So we have a staff at Bozeman doing this, and they do censuses on the land, and most of the great bird populations and the stuff we want out there are on private land, and they've not got rid of it. But we want to encourage them to manage cows more like the bison did, move them around more, and that's going to take some of this new technology. It was very exciting to see this young guy who had been off on the lure of Silicon Valley. He'd gone off and tried that and decided that wasn't as great as it really seemed to be. Came back, and I want to be on the land. They love the land. I want a ranch, and I want my kids here. And we're seeing this now. More younger people are coming back, and that's very encouraging. That the lure of Silicon Valley has gotten, a lot of people have tried it, and it ain't so great after all. And they're back there on the land, and they love the land and really care about it and know about the birds and the things that are there. And grasslands are extremely important for bird conservation, because there's a lot of things like sandpipers, plovers, grouse, where they have babies that nest on the ground, and the babies that run around and feed themselves when they hatch like baby chickens. The prairie is a wonderful place for this to happen, because it's got this high productivity. Right in the summer, it's raining, and stuff is really happening, insects and stuff, right when they're nesting. And so if you go out on the prairie on a trip in June, you have long-billed curlews, you've got marble godwits, you've got willets, you've got all sorts of things that are on the beaches in California in the winter. And when I've been involved with field trips out there, I tell these people, you like to watch those willets and godwits and curlews on the beaches in the summer? If you like that, you better care about this, because this is where they breed and this is where they have their babies. So there's a rich bird community of things with it, what we call the precocial birds, where the babies hatch and run around and can feed themselves right away. This is a wonderful place for that. And the birds that try to breed on the beaches are in big trouble, because we run cars and dogs and everything over the beaches, and it doesn't work. So this is a wonderful place for bird diversity, and the grasslands. And this is something where it's very hard for us to imagine that. I'm a big mammal, And I sort of see the prairie like a bison or an elk does. But how does a bird see it? And I try to get down on the ground and look around, and I just make a lousy bird. I'm too big. But what we know about the distribution is that little differences in the structure of that prairie make a difference of which birds are there. And that's why having them managed where some places are hit heavily, some places, increases bird diversity. And so we're trying to work to have the ranches managed to create that mosaic of variability that fosters a lot of different bird species. And there's a lot of prairie birds, and the grassland birds are the ones that are in the biggest trouble in the world and the biggest trouble in the US because of the way we've treated grasslands, getting rid of most of them and make them the ones that are left uniform. So grasslands are wonderful for birds and for the kind of birds you wouldn't expect to be there. Because it's like you're on the California beach in the winter with curlews and big water birds flying all around the place, and the little potholes got also other stuff. So this is a very rich and wonderful sort of place. We also know that as you get further east and it gets wetter, because there's the tall grass prairie over there, gets wetter, and it gets more and more likely that it can be farmed. And of course, the plant geneticists are working hard on it to get crops that will grow in that less favorable environment. So there's a lot of genetic work going on. So one of the things we do, and I've got a copy of it here, is called the plow print. And one of the things we're doing is keeping track of where grasslands are being converted into crops, where, if any, they're coming back. And we're seeing that gradually there's an encroachment of crops coming this way where it's wetter. And so what we're trying to do is to draw attention to plow print, how it's being converted, and the importance of keeping the grasses there and trying to enable a vibrant community of people who are ranching to keep it there. A favorite quote of mine, at least I think it's, at least I don't know if it's really true, but I want it to be true because it's so good. And I'll share it with you. The story is an Indian Native American is on a hillside looking down and watching the settler plowing the prairie. And he says, "Grass no good upside down. Grass no good upside down." And what we're really dedicated to do in this whole project is to say, grass is really good, right side up. Let's keep it there. Thank you. Thank you.
We have mics for three parts of this audience. Who's going to start us off with questions? They're all overwhelmed.
I think they're underwhelmed.
Is any of the region under threat for fracking or drilling for oil?
This particular area is not under. The big fracking is over here in North Dakota. Minot in through there was a lot of the fracking is. But we work a little bit over there. We've gone over to see what's going on there, and it's horrible what they're doing. They're doing everything wrong. I've been in the area there where they're doing a lot of that, and I can see 7 or 8 towers where they're just burning off natural gas, which is a wonderful resource that we ought to be saving, But it's inconvenient. They can't do anything with it right then, and so they're just burning it off. And so the fracking, they're doing it all wrong. It can be done much better and carefully, but it's a boom and bust, and it's terrible. That's not a problem, basically, mostly where we're working, but over on the edge there, that's where it is. We've been working somewhat with some of the ranchers over there to get them to realize that this is not the way you really want to go, is it? This is not the kind of future you want, because they really love the land. They love to talk about their birds and stuff. You know, they're close to it. So we gotta. They're all politically conservative, so we don't talk politics. We just talk about the ranch and the grassland. But it's really bad over there.
Gordon, you mentioned that some of the Indians have gotten up to 1,000 bison. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
What do they do with them?
What the Indians are building up their bison herds now, and mostly they've been building them, but they're going to be those lands. They're never going to have wolves and grizzlies. The predator is going to be people. So they're going to develop, as was the case back when they killed the bison and they used them for, the whole thing ran on bison meat and hides and everything else like that. So the bison will become a cash cow. They will become, the Indians will become the predators on the bison. They will harvest them. The meat will be sold. It'll help balance poverty and malnutrition on the reservation. So all of these where the Indians are bringing it back, the Indians will be the predators, and they will have to. In fact, I was just on Port Belknap Indian Reservation a couple of weeks ago, and they got too many bison. There's grown, and they've got about 1,500 bison, and the person on the staff says that they've got enough grassland for about 600 bison, and they better do some pretty heavy culling this winter, or they're going to degrade the pasture and run it down. So there's some stuff going on, but the bison will return to the major role they had as the economic basis for the tribe. But as I indicated, they don't have enough land. They can't do just that. They're also going to have to learn how to farm, and that's what we're also working on. But they're going to be the predators.
Gordon, over here, Tom Spiro.
Okay, hi, Tom.
The issue of farming depends a lot on water, of course, and the Ogallala aquifer is being drained. Does that come into the picture here?
Well, the Ogallala water aquifer is way further south. Not anywhere near where we are. This area here does not, at this present time, have problems with depletion of the water table, and there's a lot of water up here. The Missouri River flows. There's a lot of water. Right now, water is not a problem there, and what the Indians are not going to farm enough ever, because they're a small part of what's up there. This whole land. The Indian tribes, they're not. The tribal boundaries are not shown on this map, but they're a small fraction of what's there. So they're not going to do enough to deplete the aquifer. Coming from the east with mechanized agriculture and growing crops to feed cars has the danger of starting to deplete. But at the moment, that's not a problem here, and the big depletion is way on to the south.
Gordon, can you point out the areas where the greatest concentration of the bison are now located?
Okay, right here is where the biggest restoration is occurring, and right here is where Lewis and Clark saw the biggest concentrations of stuff right here, and that's where we first started our work, and that's where on the private, well, where the American Prairie is building this whole thing, that's right where that is, and building that out. And they keep adding. And there's a very interesting thing here that I didn't mention. The ranches are surrounded by government land, mostly Bureau of Land Management land. And so each ranch has an allocation on BLM land, which doubles or triples, in one case even more, the amount of land that they can graze. So the value of the ranch is determined in large part by how much grazing right they have on public land. And so when you buy the ranch, you get all that too. So it's a multiplier, and that's what gives the ranch its value, that you have grazing rights on public land. And that comes, so when the APR, American Prairie Reserve, is buying a land, it gets all that too. First there was a real problem, you're going to buy that and you're not going to put cows on it, or you're going to take cows off, you don't do that, right? They're supposed to be cows, and no, it's going to be bison, and that's okay. So finally that has been solved, but right in through there was, the short grass prairie, those grasses are very, very nutritious. And this great big tall grass stuff, that's a lot of silica and not much else, and it's not so good. So the bison and others do really well on short grasses, which are very nutritious. And things like elk, we think of elk as the mountains, they're all over the prairie when they're given a chance. And they were when you saw Lewis and Clark and the early explorers. They saw elk all over out on the plains. And they're coming out on the APR lands. I've seen elk out on the plains there. And they're wonderful out there. And you wouldn't believe it. You get a fence like this, and elk will come up and just go over it as there were nothing there. It's beautiful to watch. Boy, can they jump. And that's a lot of animal meat that's going over that fence. So they could, and pronghorn, which is the other important animal out there, they just won't jump, and they crawl under the fence. And so one of the things we're working on is a pronghorn-friendly fence. And what you do, you have the bottom layer doesn't have any barbs on it. So when they go over, they don't scrape their back or go under, they crawl under, and so you can create a pronghorn-friendly fence. And the elk can go over it and the pronghorn go under, and it's just a little bit of a design that works. So part of this is being clever, I mean, who would have thought, at least I wouldn't have thought, but I've watched it, you can make a pronghorn-friendly fence. It's coming, Si, it's coming.
Simon Ottenberg, is there much difference between generations of ranchers as they feel about this kind of project?
Yes, what we've seen is a real difference, because when we first started working out there, there was a lot of resistance, the whole idea. And the idea that you should take grasslands and agricultural land that's feeding people and set it aside so they're just going to have wild mammals running around, that doesn't sound so good. But what really changed it was that the ranchers don't have any Social Security. They've got to sell the ranch to get their money to retire, and so they require buyers. And who's going? The alternative out there, they're going to big hunting clubs want to come and produce African mammals in it, and they don't like that. They care about the land, and when American Prairie buys, they tell this is going to stay the kind of land you loved. We're going to keep that, and so gradually they came around. And now we're seeing this change again, that a lot of and there were no young people around, there was all old people when I was out there at the beginning. And now you get together the Sustainable Ranching Initiative, and they tell me that there's a lot of people in their 30s and 40s showing up. They want to come back out there, so that the lure of Silicon Valley is fading, and people are. It's hard work out there. I mean, I get it. You know, it's lying awake at night on a cot out there, listening to the nighthawks booming and the coyotes howling and everything. It's wonderful, you know, and to experience that. And they're coming back. It's going to be hard. The young ranch we were on just a couple of weeks ago, he's got 2 small kids. What's he going to do? He's going to have homeschooling for a bit, but then you're going to have to send him off somewhere. And it's going to be hard. But he was so enthusiastic, wonderful to watch, and trying different stuff and saying how he's experimenting with reseeding, and this area that shouldn't have been farmed, we're going to bring back grassland, and this is how we're doing. To talk to this and see that enthusiasm,
Gordon?
that gives me some hope.
Gordon?
Yes.
Over here, over on your right, far right. Woo. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I know that Montana State is in Bozeman. I'm wondering if your organizations, particularly the American Prairie Group, have been able to partner and get support, continuing education out of some of the state university, you know, the ag programs and so on.
Yes.
Because you're on at least 4 states there, maybe 5.
Yeah, well, the headquarters for American Prairie and World Wildlife Fund Northern Great Plains are both in Bozeman. And Bozeman is a wonderful town in that it's got a first-rate university, really a first-rate university, and some of the researchers that have come on and done PhD theses out on are students from the university, and we're working with that. And so there's been a wonderful cooperation going on there. And yet some of the faculty have come out and done research on helping us understand what needs to be done. So yes, there's Bozeman is a wonderful place for both of the organizations to have their offices, because it's a vibrant intellectual community, and it's out on the prairie side. Missoula is on the west side, and it's crowded. Bozeman is a lovely place. It's a beautiful valley, and a lot of the prairie stuff is right there, and it's an intellectually exciting place. So yes, the answer to your question, I wandered a little bit long, but the short answer is yes.
Any of the other states?
Pardon?
Any of the other states?
A little bit from Missoula, but it's further away for them, and you know, Bozeman is close, but it's mostly Bozeman. Yes.
I wondered if the massive climate change that's going on is affecting the prairie grasses and the predictability of rain, et cetera.
Well, we're all worried about climate change going on here, because right now there's been a several-year drought. It's not going. It hasn't rained much there. They didn't get much rain and not much snowpack this winter, so they're a lot worried. They are worried about it, and so it's affecting this as it's affecting everywhere else, and we just don't know what's going to happen. This last winter, it just didn't rain. It didn't snow. There's not much snow. And the runoff from the snow is very important in charging stuff, and so, yeah.
Gordon, over here.
Where?
Oh, here.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Gordon.
Hi.
I enjoyed the geography, the agriculture, and so on. But the last, can you give me a couple minutes? You got into it a bit with global warming, but talk about the politics of these red states.
Okay. All these ranchers that we're working with, we do not talk politics. I've been on a ranch where you have the prayer before breakfast when they serve you, and you just, but what it turns out is that we have this overlap of interest. They care about this land. And a story I sometimes tell, we went down to the Nebraska sandhills down at the bottom there to see if there's something we could do. And the ranchers there we met with were very suspicious. In fact, the head guy had done his research and knew that WWF International was against cows, trying to get rid of cows. And he figured they're trying to pull something over on us. And I respected him because he had done his homework. He knew exactly what he was talking about. So I got to know him, and we walked and talked together in the field. And one afternoon we were out in the field together, and he said, "I want to tell you about my burrowing owls." And I knew we'd made it. We had made it. That one simple statement, "I want to tell you about my burrowing owls." He cared about that stuff. And once he got convinced that we were what we said we weren't out to put them out of business. We were trying to understand what their needs were and was there something we could do. We made it, and just, I've told a lot of people, but that was one of the happiest movements in my life. I want to tell you about my burrowing owls.
What kind of owls?
Burrowing owl. The burrowing owl is a wonderful, out there in the prairies. It nests in holes in the ground, and it mostly nests in prairie dog burrows, and is in the same places with the prairie dog. And the black-footed ferret, which is the most endangered mammal in North America, which we're also working on, also inhabits the prairie dog burrows. And unlike the burrowing owls, it eats prairie dogs. That's what it's going after. I forgot to mention one thing. We have an evolutionary component to this that I didn't mention. In 1905, plague arrived in North America, in San Francisco. Plague is not native to North America. It comes from Europe. And the Black Death, of several times, that's plague. It spread. Plague kills 90% of prairie dogs when it gets 90% of ferrets. And what we're having to do is vaccinate ferrets, put stuff at the mouths of burrows of the prairie dogs. And we're hoping that evolution will eventually save us, that they will evolve resistance as occurs in the gerbils and jerboas and stuff where plague is native in Asia. But it ain't coming in time, and so far we're having to help natural selection by putting stuff out. So there's an evolutionary component to what we're doing here, been forced upon us by plague.
Gordon,
Okay, hi, okay.
you told us that the farmers were often willing to sell the land because, well, you said Social Security wasn't enough for them or something. But my question is, where does the big money come from that's supporting this organization? It's certainly not the little donations that most of us give.
Yeah. Okay, well, they don't have any Social Security, the ranchers. So they don't have much to draw upon because they never had salaries. You know, it was just they needed. Well, where does our money come from? And a lot of it comes from private donations. Also get a lot of support from foundations. The foundations and some of the agricultural foundations that are very interested in what we're doing, Cargill and others, and some of these big have sort of grants they can make to further this. So the staff, which was based in Bozeman, has very vigorous in getting money from a lot of sources, and a lot of it comes from foundations. But we're also building this base of people who are friends of the prairie, so to speak, and annually give money. And if you got a lot of friends of the prairie, you get a lot of money. As campaigns know that you can run a great big campaigns on $10 donations if you get a lot of donations. So we're working on that. And that's why we bring people out there, and people get to see the place, and people get hooked. People get hooked. And people coming up from San Francisco to walk out there, and they're transformed. You watch them. And it's great because there's something about, I mean, I experience this, walk out and watch the bison. Bison is an amazing mammal. And it's big and powerful and wonderful, and you walk, wow, you know, I mean, you just feel, there's this feeling that you have, and that's what really is going to eventually drive the money. But the staff is very good at getting money from foundations of one sort or another. So that, yeah, all of this takes money, yes. But with the sustainable ranching, the ranchers participate. They buy in, and we provide them. So we do the bird surveys and other stuff to let them know how well this is working. What are you doing? So we provide them a service, and they buy in on it. And so, and I think a lot of these ranchers are worried about the future, you know, and what's happening. And they would like to. They don't want to feed cars. They want to raise bison or cattle to feed people, but they're worried about what's going to happen. And so they have a motivation that get sustainable beef and get people to recognize that if you want this out there, you got to stop being anti-cows. You've got to adjust that. There's a lot of problems the way we raise cows, and a lot of problems with them and everything. But you can't be purist, no cows. If you want no cows, you have to give up grasslands. And I think it's a bad trade. And we need to solve our cow problem and methane and all that, not by sacrificing grasslands. I think that's a bad trade. That's my personal, that's why I'm working on this. Yeah.
What are the Indian tribes that you're working with the buffalo?
The biggest ones are Oglala Sioux, and there's interesting, the Badlands National Park, which is, let's see, where is it? It's right in here. It's been, and that is, there's hope. It's got two units, the north unit and the south unit. And the north is developed as the Badlands National Park with everything. The south unit is the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which we honored by using it as a bombing range during World War II. And that's how we honor Indian treaties. And so, but there's still the possibility that that can become an Indian, that south unit can be developed as a national park run by the Indians. And that's our long-term goal. But meanwhile, we're just helping the Indian corporations go, because the leadership changes every 2 years, and working with the tribal leadership is frustrating, to say the least. I can see you nodding. But we haven't given up on that. But the wonderful thing about these new Indian corporations, they're not dependent upon the tribes at all. There's a lot of land available there, and they're pretty much independent corporations, and they're just moving ahead blockbusters. And it's wonderful to see them. They're getting really business smart, and I'm really, really impressed with a couple of the tribes that we're working with that they formed these corporations. That's impressive, really impressive.
Well, thank you, Gordon. Thank you, everybody. This is fantastic.